And joining me now in Toronto is lawyer Alan Young. He has a long history in arguing this pot issue. A decade ago, he took part in Canada's first ever constitutional challenge to possession laws, and he was the lawyer in one of the cases the Supreme Court will rule on today. Welcome.
Good morning.
Back again to talk on this issue again all these years later.
Yes.
I'm sure I know what you would hope the Supreme Court will rule, but in reality, what do you think they're going to rule today?
It's really hard to say. It's always hard to know whether a court is prepared to change the legal landscape. I'm sure there are a few judges. Remember, there's 9 judges. I'm sure there's a few judges who agree with us. But there's going to be some judges that have ideological opposition to this. So I'm not a wagering person. I don't like to gamble on stuff. But if I was to put my money down, I'd say we're going to actually lose the case. They'll uphold the law on a 6-3 split. We'll get 3 judges going our way and 6 not going our way. But I must tell you, we've won the case anyways, because this was about public education. And through the 8 years it took to get to the Supreme Court of Canada, we got a lot of information out there which rebutted state propaganda. So the Canadian public is behind us. So we actually have achieved success regardless of what the court rules.
Okay. Let's go back to what the court may rule, though, too. If in fact, it loses, although we're not wagering, if it does lose, what implications will that have for this whole process?
If the court upholds the law, we've lost a lot, because that means we're going to have to rely upon the political realm to solve this problem. And despite the promises that have been made this year, politicians have proved to be very two-faced on this issue, and they lack political will. We really relied upon our litigation strategy in the courts. So if the court was to uphold the law, we have to now focus on the legislature and Parliament, which is really not something I like to do. I was much more comfortable in the court setting.
Okay. Mark Emery, a long time, someone you know well, has been arguing on your side of the issue for a long time, mentioned in a news report we ran earlier today that he just wants it to be clear.
Yes.
Is that also something that you're hoping for?
I agree. Look, I don't want the law. I think it's a bad law, but I think it's a horrible situation we've been in for 2 years where the law has been in flux and we don't know whether the police can enforce the law or not. That's the worst case scenario. So I agree with Mark. Even though I really don't want them to uphold the law, at least there be some clarity that we know where we stand, because I love the so-called summer of love this summer where there was no law to enforce. But when I look at the public interest in Canada, it's not good to have a law with uncertainty. You have to know that it's enforceable and the police are willing to enforce it. The situation we have right now is too schizophrenic for good public policy.
So if that law is upheld, where do you go from here? You said you're not really...
We got to go to the politicians. We've pretty much exhausted our litigation strategy. We still have a case that's going to go up to the Supreme Court of Canada on medical use, and we still might be able to get decriminalization through the medical program, the deficiencies in the medical program. But I really like this case that we started in '97 because it was a direct challenge to Parliament's ability to criminalize relatively harmless conduct. I think that's a very important political precept that I hope the Supreme Court supports, that we call it the harm principle, that Parliament must have a reasonable apprehension of serious harm before it acts. That would be a good thing for Canada. So I'm hoping that's the direction the court goes in.
What keeps you fighting this battle after nearly 10 years?
It's kind of fun, actually. Though I must say I'm very disheartened to see how difficult the battle's been. But it's an easier battle to fight when you're talking about pot smoking. I mean, that's why journalists like the issue. It's a lot better than doing criminal law in the area of pedophilia or attempted murder or things like that. I generally like my clients. I generally have a good time with my clients. I enjoy their company. So it's a simple liberty issue that's doesn't carry all the baggage of heavy criminality, which does scare some people. I'm a defense lawyer. I'm used to it, but I like to deal with this issue because I think it's an important liberty issue, and I have no concerns about my clients or my security.
And where are you going to be when the Supreme Court decision comes down?
I probably will be in a television studio trying to quickly make some comments without actually having read the judgment. And to give credit to the Supreme Court of Canada, they write very lengthy, articulate judgments. So I really want to be able to digest it before I tell the world what the situation is.
Well, we will definitely be talking to you more about that further, but thank you for setting the stage for us today. Alan Young, lawyer here in Toronto. Now, that Supreme Court decision is expected today at 9:45 Eastern Time, which puts it just about an hour and a half from now. We'll have live coverage and some of that analysis Alan Young was mentioning right here on CBC News Morning.
Hello, I'm Lauren Saxberg. Welcome to CBC News Today. We'll be talking with one of the people who challenged Canada's marijuana laws and lost the final battle in the Supreme Court. But first, the ruling itself. It's a major setback for marijuana advocates. The Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that possession of small amounts of pot will remain illegal. The High Court says it's up to Parliament to decide whether it should change how this country deals with the issue. The CBC's Carolyn Dunn is following the story in Ottawa. Carolyn, tell us a little more about today's decision and what went into it.
Well, Lauren, it was a 6-3 decision by the Supreme Court of Canada, and basically what it ruled is that marijuana remains an illegal substance in this country. The law was under constitutional challenge, as you know, and the court's ruling today basically said that Canada's marijuana laws do not violate the Charter of Rights, as had been argued by the appellants. Here's your quote of the day, Lauren. The court said clearly that there is no freestanding constitutional right to smoke pot for recreational purposes. And interestingly enough, the court also reaffirmed that the power to change Canada's marijuana laws falls directly with Parliament. Obviously, as you said in your intro, this is a disappointment to the appellants in this case, but there's already some early positive reaction. The Canadian Professional Police Association says this decision basically reaffirms what they've been saying, the basic principle that pot is illegal. And that's one of the many organizations that will be lobbying the Martin government to have some influence as it goes ahead with drafting proposed legislation to decriminalize marijuana.
Let's talk a little bit about that, Carolyn. What is the next step in all of this now, and what does it mean now that the Supreme Court has essentially thrown the ball into the lap of the federal government?
Well, basically what it means is that Parliament basically is going to have to make some sort of decision about whether it wishes to decriminalize marijuana. The Martin government has already said that there is an intention to bring proposed legislation forward. And there was something interesting in this ruling that's a couple hundred pages in, but it will have an effect on how that legislation is proposed. What the court says is that even though it is the jurisdiction of the province to, or rather of the federal government, to make up Canada's marijuana laws, that if they take it off the criminal books, then all of a sudden the jurisdiction of the federal government could be questioned. So that's something that is going to be watched very, very closely by the folks who will be proposing this draft legislation to decriminalize marijuana. Could have a major implication on new legislation.
All right, thank you for this, Carolyn. The CBC's Carolyn Dunn in Ottawa.